Let me set the scene. You are Eric Knudsen, and it's summer of 2009. You see a paranormal image competition, and being somewhat skilled with Photoshop, you whip up these two images and hit submit. In those moments of pride, after posting those images, Eric was wholly aware of what he had just done. He had created a monster, but not any kind of monster the world was prepared for or had ever seen before. This was a monster for the 21st century. He had made an info hazard that would hijack online and global culture for the next decade and irreversibly change the landscape of the internet and the real-world lives of thousands. The first great urban legend of the modern age, what would come to be known as the Slenderman.
We didn't want to go. We didn't want to kill them. But its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time.
Slenderman is frequently referred to as the first great piece of internet folklore, and it's not hard to see why. His existence is a cycle of reinterpretations and community consensus, with different elements of what we would consider central to the modern Slenderman mythos, traceable to all corners of the internet. But today it's unlikely you'll see any meaningful new piece of Slenderman media. This is in one part due to the nature of the internet, or more specifically the next generation finding their own urban legends, but also due to the fact that Slenderman simply became too metaphorically colossal to carry on like he did in 2009. The days of the creepy internet enigma are sadly over. How we got to this point is what I'll be talking about today. How Slenderman rose to fame as an icon of indie horror, his fall into mediocrity, and the legacy he left behind. Imagine, you are Troy Wagner. It's 2009, and you've just seen Eric Knudsen post on Something Awful. Over the next 10 days, he recorded all 3 seasons of Marble Hornets, and just 10 days after the original Slenderman post, we had the beginning of what would become the most influential piece of Slenderman media. I'm not going into any detail concerning Marble Hornets, the production or narrative. There are already several great videos going into the series. What I'll be referencing throughout the video is how the series treats Slenderman, or as they refer to him, the Operator. It's important to remember Marble Hornets ran from 2009 till 2014, making it a constant influence throughout the entirety of what I'll call the golden age of Slenderman. Understanding Slenderman in the context of Marble Hornets is where things get a bit difficult. The creators have made it perfectly clear that this is not Slenderman. It's an original creature that takes inspiration from the Slenderman. However, as time passed and Marble Hornets became more and more popular, the centralized lore of Slenderman began to draw inspiration from Marble Hornets, and we'll see examples of this later on. Aside from Marble Hornets, which was at the time still a little-known project, the main sources of Slenderman-related media were creepypastas and artwork. Because of his low notoriety online, what Slenderman was very ill-defined. And I mean that in the best possible way. I've spoken a lot in previous videos about the use of mystery in horror. In summary, something is made exponentially more frightening when we have little to no information about it. Because when we're forced to fill in the gaps on our own, you'll imagine whatever is scariest to you personally. For example, what's going on here? Where is this place? What did it sound like? Were the children laughing or crying for help? Because Slenderman lore was a free-for-all, a lot of stuff once considered canon is now forgotten to the annals of time. I remember he used to be a lot more hands-on. His old MO used to be luring people to the woods and then hanging them from a tree minus their internal organs. I like to imagine Slenderman repeatedly trying to toss a rope over a branch as he attempts to string someone up. Gradually, however, it would be agreed upon by those actively discussing Slenderman that he was more of a background lurker, Soon, the concept of being murdered by Slenderman would be considered too out of character. Now he was more in the business of disappearing people without a trace. I think this has to be somewhat influenced by Marble Hornets, and I personally think it's much more in line with the original Knudsen posts. It's also fun to see people creating fake historical lore for the character, pretending like he's an evil force that's been haunting humans for thousands of years. Really fun to think about and represents the kind of free-for-all theorizing surrounding him at the time.
How's it going, bro? My name is Slenderman. Welcome to... I guess the game will show you in... There it is. Slender!
In 2012, Parsec Productions would release the single most important piece of Slenderman-related media ever. They made a short, simple game where you, the player, are slowly stalked in the woods by the Slenderman. The game would go viral, and soon Slender, the 8 pages, and the character of Slenderman were known worldwide. The game was free and released during the peak of the screaming horror game YouTuber craze, with PewDiePie and Tobuscus making multiple videos playing the game and setting off a chain reaction that resulted in every YouTuber on the site making Slender videos screaming at the camera. And I do mean every YouTuber.
Absolute leech!
Even YouTubers who didn't usually make gaming content still recorded their playthrough, as just seeing their reactions to the game was enough to get views.
You zoomed in on the mouse?
The most important thing to remember here is that these YouTubers had audiences made up predominantly of children. Children who had now been exposed to Slenderman and would begin independently looking into the mythos surrounding him. It's a fairly well-documented social phenomenon that young people will naturally be drawn to things deemed edgy and not intended for kids. In the 80s it was a quipping hedgehog, and nowadays it's man-made horrors beyond comprehension. Seeing this mysterious, horrifying, malevolent entity, the collective minds of loser internet kids were hijacked by the concept of being driven mad and tormented by Slenderman. This is the age of anime Slenderman fan drawings and Slenderman X-Reader fanfiction. Key thing to remember is that at this time, despite rapidly growing in popularity, the character was for the most part still regarded as a serious horror character. But nevertheless, you could see the beginning of what would eventually lead to the downfall of Slender. Extensive documentation that went against the very essence of what he was meant to be. Quick side note concerning ownership of Slenderman. It's complicated. Since he was essentially made by a collective, you would think he was effectively public domain, but Eric Knudsen does hold a copyright to the character. This means any major commercial Slenderman projects need his approval. This explained the current low number of Slenderman-related media projects, but soon that would all change. In 2013, less than a year after their first game, Parsec Productions and Blue Sky Studios would release Slender: The Arrival. The sequel was assumedly trying to capitalize off the hype the first game generated. Except now a price tag meant the studios and Knudsen would for the first time be making a profit from the Slenderman character. Despite quite a lot of pre-release hype, the game would unfortunately fall flat, with its main criticisms being the short campaign and fairly simplistic scares. As mentioned previously, Slenderman works best as a figure hidden in the background, and the gradual build-up and his first scripted appearance in the garden are great, but after he relentlessly begins hunting you, he just turns into a game enemy that you need to abuse wall physics to overcome. As Slender: The Arrival, owing to Knudsen's involvement, could be considered a firm installment to the Slenderman canon, it inadvertently solidifies what Slenderman was. By taking different elements from other creative sources, Marble Hornet's proxies, the 8 pages teleporting, Slenderman now had a defined set of rules for how he operated. This is why I mark the release of Slender the Arrival as the start of the decline. As an endless wave of informative Slenderman Explained videos were eaten up by the masses, Slenderman would stray away from what made him once so unique.
Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and in this installment of Versus, we're pitting Slenderman against Jeff the Killer.
Hands up!
He was now tangible, not an eldritch horror, but an internet scary story. The macabre painting that the internet had together slowly been creating was now complete. General interest in Slenderman would dwindle. After the conclusion of Marble Hornets, there was no major Slender-related project on the horizon, and for the time being, it seemed like Slenderman was ready to fade, quietly, back into the woods.
And our big story at 5, two 12-year-old girls charged with trying to stab a friend to death after a sleepover. Police say they were inspired by a fictional character from the internet.
On May 31st, 2014, two teenage girls would lure their friend into the woods near Waukesha, Wisconsin, and stab her repeatedly in the chest. She barely just survived, and the two girls were arrested. Later investigations revealed the attempted murder was actually an attempt by the two girls to appease Slenderman. Understandably, the case received nationwide coverage, and as a result, Slenderman was introduced to the masses.
You have a wide range of people taking part in this. You had those initial web
series. The media
series,
certainly wasn't kind to old Slendy. The main narrative surrounding the case was that the internet was indoctrinating kids into supernatural cults, and if your child reads about Jeff the Killer, they'll build a pipe shotgun and kill you after you tuck them in. The fearmongering was naturally very exaggerated and failed to take into account the mental state of the two perpetrators. But nevertheless, Slenderman was out of the bag. He no longer belonged exclusively to the internet. The disappointing Marble Hornets spin-off in 2015 certainly didn't help this fact, and only seemed to enforce that even something connected to the beloved internet series wasn't enough to reignite interest in the character. Slenderman's retirement wasn't as graceful as intended. His reputation as the internet boogeyman was certainly tarnished, but perhaps it was finally time for him to rest. Oh, wait, what? In 2018, Sony Pictures crashed through the window of cinemas worldwide with Slenderman, a feature film based directly on Eric Knudson's character. Words cannot describe the shock people felt upon seeing such a high-budget project based on the character so long after he had faded from relevance. I remember people joking about how the film was 5 years too late, and how, from trailers and clips, it appeared to have little regard for the more subtle elements of Slenderman lore, appearing to be just another generic summer horror film. Despite cautious optimism, the film bombed, marking the second failed cinematic outing for Slendy. And that really was the end of Slenderman. His fade from relevance was less of a graceful bow and more of him being dragged screaming from his hiding spot and thrown into the news or a cinema repeatedly. But finally, I think popular culture has moved beyond Slenderman, in any sincere way at least. Thanks to early 2010s nostalgia, Slenderman is now seen as the edgy fanfiction we all wrote as angsty teens. Something you cringe at when you see the drawings and fanfictions you wrote, but you can't help but smile at, remembering how silly it all was. Did the internet destroy him? Partly, yes. But it's also just the nature of what Slenderman was. A communal horror art project centered around a mysterious entity where anyone could add something. And if everyone is adding something, eventually it will build up into something that's not mysterious, but solid and defined. That's just how folklore works, and what we ended up with was, well, Slenderman. In human culture, What happens when the stories people tell and share become solidified, and the reinterpretations stop? When everyone agrees with one version, one rendition of the tale in question, what you're left with is a legend. And the impact this legend has had on us all is not one to be scoffed at. This legend is a black and white image of a running group of children. And behind them, arms outstretched, stands a nightmare that shocked the hearts of thousands and lingered menacingly in the minds of millions. And the legend has just one line of text. When you see it, you shit bricks. Thanks for watching, guys. If you liked what you saw, be sure to abduct that subscribe button.